Latoya Jenkins slumped against the sticky vinyl seat of the squad car, the Alabama night pressing in thick and humid through the cracked window. Her wrists throbbed where Officer Dwayne Carver had twisted them, the metal cuffs biting into her skin like a dog's teeth sinking into a bone. She could still hear the reporters shouting her name beyond the tinted glass, their voices fading, as Carver peeled out from the hospital lot, gravel crunching under the tires. The air inside stank of stale cigarettes and sweat, a sour mix that clung to her throat. She gripped the edge of her seat with her bound hands, replaying the moment that had spiraled her victory into this mess. Just minutes ago she'd stood tall, a 38-year-old black nurse who'd risked everything to expose how Birmingham General neglected black patients, leaving them to die in filthy beds while white folks got VIP treatment. Her report, a stack of typed pages stained with coffee and tears, had hit the news like a brick through a windshield. She'd assumed the fight was over, that the truth would shield her. Then Carver's meaty hand had clamped her arm, his voice barking she was trespassing on private property, his pale blue eyes glinting with something darker than duty. The White House call had stopped him cold, his radio spitting static and a garbled voice, but now, as he drove her toward the station, she smirked. That call had to mean something big, a lifeline from on high. She'd be out by morning. Headlines, screaming her name again. The Birmingham police station loomed ahead, a squat brick building with flickering neon buzzing over the entrance. Carver yanked her out, his fingers digging into her elbow, and marched her through the double doors into a haze of fluorescent light and chaos. Cops milled around, their boots scuffing the chipped linoleum, radios squawking about a bar fight downtown. The air was heavy, thick with the tang of bleach and unwashed bodies. Latoya held her head high, her braids swaying against her back, refusing to let the cuffs shrink her. Carver shoved her toward the booking desk, where a paunchy sergeant with a buzzcut lounged, chewing a toothpick. He glanced up, his lips curling into a sneer as he took her in, a black woman in a wrinkled nurse's jacket daring to stand there, like she belonged. "Troublemaker, huh?" he grunted, spitting the toothpick onto the floor. "Heard you been stirring up shit at the hospital." Another cop, younger, with a patchy beard, leaned over from a nearby desk, snickering. "Yeah, what's it like thinking you're some kind of hero, huh? Should have stayed in your lane." The words stung sharp as a slap, but Latoya bit her tongue, her mind racing. The White House call echoed in her head, a promise of rescue. She'd seen Carver's face drain of color when it came through. Any minute now, she told herself, someone would burst in, orders in hand, and this would all unravel. Carver slammed her paperwork onto the desk, his thick fingers smudging the ink. "Resisting arrest," he said, voice flat but eyes gleaming, with malice. Caught her mouthing off, wouldn't comply. Latoya's jaw tightened. "That's a lie," she snapped, her voice cutting through the station's hum. "You grabbed me for no reason, and I've got rights." The sergeant chuckled, a low, wet sound, and waved her off like she was a fly buzzing too close. "Rights don't mean squat when you're causing a scene, sweetheart." He typed her name into the system, the keyboard clacking loud in her ears, each stroke feeling like a nail in her coffin. She glared at Carver, his broad shoulders hunched as he scribbled something on a clipboard. "That call you got," she said loud enough for the room to hear. "White House doesn't mess around, you're in over your head." He froze for a split second, then turned, his face a mask of contempt. "Keep dreaming," he muttered. But there was a flicker of unease in his stare, a crack in his armor she latched onto. She'd win this yet. The fax machine in the corner whirred to life, spitting out a single sheet that the young cop snatched up with a grin. He sauntered over, waving it like a trophy. "Well, look at this. Birmingham General's done with you. Jenkins, fired, effective immediately, says your little report's a pack of lies disrupted patient care." Latoya's stomach dropped, a cold weight settling in her gut. She'd poured months into that evidence, late nights poring over charts, sneaking photos of neglected wards. They couldn't just erase it. "That's bullshit," she said, voice trembling with fury. "I've got proof and they know it." The sergeant shrugged, tossing the fax onto a pile of papers. "Not my problem. You're booked now." Resisting. Arrest disturbing the peace, smile for the mugshot. Carver grabbed her arm again, dragging her toward the camera, his grip tighter than before, bruising her skin purple. She twisted, spitting words at him. You're a coward, hiding behind that badge. Everyone saw what you did out there. Racist pig. The young cop snickered again, but a rookie in the corner, barely 20, fumbled with his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. Latoya caught his eye, saw the flush creeping up his neck. He was recording, she realized, every slur, every shove captured in secret. Hours crawled by in the holding cell, a concrete box reeking of piss and mold. Latoya paced, her sneakers squeaking on the damp floor, replaying the night. The White House call had to be her ticket out. Maybe a senator caught wind of her story, or some aide saw the news. She clung to that hope, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the bars. Then the door clanged open and Carver stormed in, his face twisted with something new, rage mixed with panic. "You think you're slick?" he growled, holding up his radio. "That call? Wrong number. Some intern dialed me by mistake looking for a damn caterer. You've got nothing." Latoya's heart sank, a sick lurch that left her dizzy. No rescue, no cavalry, just her alone against a system itching to bury her. She forced a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Doesn't matter. People saw you. They'll talk." Carver's lip curled, but before he could snap back, the rookie burst in, breathless. "Sarge, it's online. Someone posted a video, you and her. It's everywhere." Carver's eyes widened, and Latoya's pulse quickened. The rookie's recording, she thought. Her words, his slurs, live for the world to see. By midnight, the station was a hornet's nest. Phones rang off the hook, reporters clamoring outside, their lights painting the windows in strobing red and blue. Latoya sat on the cell's metal bench, a smirk tugging at her lips as she overheard the chaos. The video had blown up, hashtags trending, her name a rallying cry. Carver's voice, thick with venom, calling her uppity and worse, looped on every screen in Birmingham. She could almost taste the win, the public turning on him, on the hospital. She'd walk free, she told herself, head high, her report validated. Then the fax machine whirred again, and the sergeant stormed in, slapping a new sheet against the bars. "Birmingham General suing you," he said, grinning like a wolf with fresh kill. "Defamation, $5 million. Says you made it all up, and they've got witnesses to prove it." Latoya's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold dread that snaked up her spine. Witnesses? She'd worked alone, kept it quiet. They were lying, fabricating a noose to choke her with. Carver leaned close, his breath hot and sour. "You're done. Jenkins, should have kept your mouth shut." She stared back, defiance burning through the fear, but inside she felt the ground shift. This wasn't over. It was just beginning, and they were coming for her harder than she'd ever imagined. The key cell door slammed shut, locking her in with the echo of Carver's laugh. She sank onto the bench, her mind racing, piecing together the next move. The video was out there, a weapon she hadn't planned on, but it wasn't enough. Not against a lawsuit, not against a hospital with deep pockets and deeper lies. Her wrists ached, the cuffs long gone, but the marks still raw, a reminder of how fast they'd turned on her. She'd exposed their rot, and now they'd twist it, paint her as the villain. The rookie's tape had given her a spark, a flicker of power, but Pratt, that silver-haired bastard running the hospital, wouldn't let it stand. She could feel his shadow stretching over her, a man who'd built his empire on quiet racism, on bodies ignored in back wards. He'd bury her in court, drown her in debt, unless she fought back smarter. Her eyes narrowed, tracing cracks in the cell wall. She'd find a way, she swore it, even as the lawsuit's weight pressed down, a storm gathering strength. The station's noise faded, leaving her alone with her resolve, a fire kindling in her chest. They thought they'd broken her, but they'd just lit the match. Latoya Jenkins stood in the blistering heat of a Birmingham street, the sun baking the asphalt until it shimmered like a mirage. Sweat trickled down her neck, soaking the collar of her faded nurse's jacket, but she barely noticed. Around her, a sea of faces roared her name, a chaotic rally swelling with righteous fury. Signs bobbed above the crowd, scrawled with slogans in thick black marker. "Justice for Latoya. End hospital racism now." Her chest swelled, a rare burst of pride cutting through the exhaustion that had dogged her since the cell. And the coma, video, that shaky rookie's recording of Carver's slurs and her defiance, had spread like wildfire across the city, maybe beyond. She'd heard whispers of it hitting Atlanta news, even Mobile. People believed her now, saw the truth she'd bled for. Birmingham General let black patients rot while Officer Dwayne Carver played enforcer for the system. She adjusted her braids, the weight of their eyes lifting her up. This was it, she thought, the tide turning. Justice wasn't just a word anymore. It was a pulse in the air, loud as the chants shaking the pavement. The crowd parted as a skinny kid with a megaphone scrambled onto a milk crate, his voice cracking with passion. "Latoya Jenkins exposed the lies. She's our hero." Cheers erupted, fists pumping, and she nodded back, lips twitching into a tight smile. Her wrists still bore the purple ghosts of cuffs, but here she felt free. She scanned the faces, black and brown, and a few pale ones too, all united against the hospital's rot. Could this be the moment she'd dreamed of? The one that made all the late nights worth it? She'd spent months dodging Carver's glares at work, smuggling charts under her coat, typing until her fingers cramped. Now they saw her, really saw her. A woman near the front, grey hair peeking from a headscarf, clutched her hand and pressed a crumpled dollar bill into her palm. "For your fight," she whispered, eyes wet. Latoya swallowed hard, the gesture lodging in her throat like a stone. She was winning, wasn't she? The hospital couldn't hide from this. Then the mood shifted, a ripple of unease snaking through the rally. Heads turned toward a cluster of TV vans parked across the street, their antennas stabbing the sky. A murmur grew, sharp and jagged, as screens flickered to life on the news feeds. Latoya squinted, her stomach tightening. A man stepped into view on the broadcast, silver hair gleaming under the studio lights, his suit crisp as a blade. Vernon Pratt, the hospital's CEO, stared down the camera with a predator's calm. She'd seen him before, strutting through the wards like he owned the air itself, a king who'd never dirtied his hands. His voice boomed over the crowd's din, smooth and cold. "Latoya Jenkins is no hero. She's a liar who endangered patients with her reckless accusations." The words hit her like a fist, knocking the breath from her lungs. Pratt held up a stack of papers, patient logs he claimed she'd doctored. Proof. She'd neglected black patients herself, letting them suffer while she played martyr. "We have evidence," he said, his smile a thin slash. "She's the real threat here." The rally froze, a collective gasp sucking the energy dry. Latoya's ears rang, disbelief clawing at her chest. Those logs were fake, had to be. She'd spent sleepless nights documenting neglect, not causing it. Pratt was twisting her truth into a noose, and the crowd was buying it. A man in a red cap spun toward her, his face contorted with sudden rage. "You let my cousin die?" he bellowed, voice raw. Before she could answer, a bottle sailed through the air, shattering at her feet, glass spraying her shins. She stumbled back, blood prickling where shards bit her skin. Another flew, then another, a hailstorm of fury from the people who'd cheered her seconds ago. "Liar!" a woman screamed, her voice shrill over the growing roar. Latoya's hands shook, clutching the dollar bill, now a crumpled relic of hope. How could they turn so fast? She'd shown them the truth, hadn't she? Boots thudded behind her, heavy and deliberate. She whirled to see Carver cutting through the chaos, his badge glinting like a warning. 4 more cops flanked him, batons drawn, their faces hard with purpose. "Disperse," he shouted, but his eyes locked on her, a hunter sighting prey. The crowd scattered, some shoving past, others hurling insults as they fled. Latoya stood, her ground fists clenched, until Carver's hand clamped her shoulder, spinning her into the nearest officer's grip. "You're under arrest," he snarled, his breath hot against her ear. "Inciting a riot. Should have known you'd cause trouble." She twisted, glaring into his pale eyes. "This is Pratt's doing, and you're his dog," she spat. He smirked, shoving her toward a squad car as sirens wailed, drowning out the rally's last gasps. Her sneakers skidded on the pavement, slick with spilled beer and her own blood, but she kept her chin up. They wouldn't break her, not yet. The car door slammed, trapping her in the familiar stink of vinyl and smoke. Through the window she saw the crowd thinning, their signs trampled into the dirt. Carver climbed in front, radio crackling as he barked orders. She leaned back, mind racing. Pratt's move was bold but sloppy. Those logs wouldn't hold up, not if she could get her hands on the originals. She'd fight this, expose him again. The car lurched forward, weaving through the mess of overturned chairs and shattered glass. She closed her eyes, replaying Pratt's smug face, the crowd's betrayal. Was this what justice cost, a fleeting cheer before the knives came out? Then a crack split the air, a rock smashing the windshield, spider-webbing the glass. Carver cursed, swerving, and she jolted upright. A figure darted past, hoodie shadowing their face, but she caught a glimpse of a phone recording. Someone still believed her, maybe. She seized the moment, pounding the divider with her bound hands. "Let me out," she yelled. "You've got no proof I started this." Carver ignored her, tires squealing as he sped toward the station. But she saw the flicker in his jaw, the tension of a man who knew the cameras were rolling again. She'd slipped their grip at the rally, darted through alleys as the mob turned, her breath ragged but her will iron. Now, locked in this cage on wheels, she felt the spark reignite. Pratt thought he'd flipped the script, but she'd rewrite it. She'd survived the bottles, the batons, the lies. Her shins stung, blood clotting in sticky trails, but she flexed her fingers, testing her strength. The station loomed ahead, same brick hellhole she'd left hours ago. Carver dragged her out, his grip bruising anew, but she smirked through the pain. "You're scared," she said, voice low. "Pratt's lies won't stick." He shoved her inside without a word, but his silence screamed louder than any slur. The holding cell welcomed her back, its damp walls a mocking embrace. She sank, onto the bench, replaying the rally's collapse. Pratt's forged logs had turned her allies into enemies, a masterstroke she hadn't seen coming. But she'd escaped the worst, hadn't she? The rock through the windshield, that hooded figure. Filming it meant something. She traced the cuts on her legs, each one a badge of survival. Pratt and Carver thought they'd crushed her, but they'd only sharpened her edge. She'd find those originals, bury them in their own filth. The station buzzed outside, phones ringing, voices shouting about the riot. She leaned against the bars, a plan forming. "Comment number 1 if you think Latoya's been betrayed by a system that never wanted her to win. Hit like and subscribe if you're rooting for her comeback, because this fight's just getting started." What happens when a whistleblower becomes a target and the hunter becomes the hunted? Rain hammered the Birmingham back alley, a relentless drumbeat that turned the cracked pavement into a slick black mirror. Latoya Jenkins crouched behind a rusted dumpster, her breath fogging in the damp chill, every exhale a silent prayer she wouldn't be heard. Her nurse's jacket hung heavy, soaked through, clinging to her skin like a second layer of exhaustion. The cuts on her shins from the rally throbbed, fresh blood mixing with the grime as she pressed a trembling hand to her leg. She'd bolted. From Carver's squad car when he'd stopped at a light, the door's faulty lock her only stroke of luck in a night gone to hell. Now, hiding in this forgotten corner of the city, she was a fugitive, the weight of that word sinking into her bones. The rally's cheers still echoed in her mind, a cruel memory against Pratt's forged logs and the mob's bottles. She'd thought the leaked video would save her, but Vernon Pratt had turned it into a weapon, branding her a patient killer. Her chest tightened, rage simmering beneath the fear. She wasn't done yet, not while she could still breathe. The alley reeked of rotting trash and motor oil, a stench that coated her throat as she shifted, peering through the downpour. Headlights swept past too close and she ducked lower, heart pounding against her ribs. Carver was out there, hunting her, his badge a license to terrorize. She could still feel his grip from the station, the way he'd shoved her like she was less than human. But she had a plan, a lifeline in the chaos. Jamal Reed, a wiry lawyer with a reputation for digging up dirt on the powerful, had texted her an hour ago, promising to meet her here. She'd called him from a burner phone snatched off a rally straggler, her voice shaking but firm. "I need help," she'd said, and he'd replied without hesitation, "I've got something on Pratt." Now, as rain plastered her braids to her scalp, she clung to that hope. If Jamal could prove the hospital CEO's lies, she'd clear. Her name turned this manhunt into a reckoning. Footsteps splashed nearby, deliberate and slow, and Latoya's pulse spiked. She peeked out, spotting a figure in a hooded jacket, hands stuffed in pockets. Jamal. Relief washed over her, loosening the knot in her gut. She stepped from the shadows, wincing as her injured leg protested, and waved him over. His dark eyes met hers, sharp with urgency, and he pulled a damp folder from under his coat. "Gotcha something big," he whispered, voice barely audible over the storm. "Pratt's been bribing folks to lie about you. Bank records, dates, names." Latoya snatched the papers, her fingers trembling as she skimmed the grainy photocopies. Numbers danced in the dim streetlight, payments to hospital staff, even a cop she recognized from the station. "This is it," she breathed, a grin breaking through the fatigue. "We take this public and he's finished." Jamal nodded, his jaw tight. "Already sent copies to a friend at the paper. It'll hit tomorrow." She clutched the folder to her chest, victory tasting sweet for the first time since the hospital steps. Pratt's castle of lies was crumbling, and she'd be the one to kick it down. They huddled under a sagging awning, plotting their next move. Jamal's plan was simple: lay low until the story broke, then hit the courts with a countersuit. Latoya nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. She'd hide out at his cousin's place, a rundown duplex on the city's edge, safe from Carver's patrols. The rain eased, leaving a dripping silence, and she felt the weight lift just a little. "We did it," she said, clapping his shoulder. "They won't see this coming." Jamal smirked, a rare flash of teeth, and turned to lead her out of the alley. That's when the world exploded. Headlights blazed from the street, pinning them in blinding white, and tires screeched as a black SUV roared up. Latoya froze, dread clawing her throat. Carver leapt out, pistol drawn, his silhouette massive against the glare. "Hands up, Jenkins!" he bellowed, voice cutting through the night. Two more cops flanked him, rifles gleaming with raindrops, their faces blank masks of authority. Jamal shoved the folder into her hands, stepping between her and Carver. "She's got nothing on her," he shouted, but Carver's grin was feral, a hunter savoring the kill. "Harboring a fugitive," he said, nodding to the others. "Cuff him." Latoya's mind spun, panic flooding her veins. How had they found her? She bolted, legs screaming as she darted down the alley, the folder slipping under her arm. Gunshots cracked, deafening, and she ducked as bullets tore into the brick wall beside her, spraying dust into her eyes. She heard Jamal yell, a sharp cry cut off by a thud, but she didn't look back. Her feet pounded the wet pavement, splashing through puddles that soaked her sneakers, her breath ragged and burning. The alley twisted, narrow and dark, and she veered behind a stack of crates, pressing herself flat. Her lungs heaved, every gasp a fight against collapse. She'd lost them, she told herself, peering out. The gunfire had stopped, the SUV's engine rumbling in the distance. She'd escaped, folder still clutched tight, Jamal's sacrifice buying her seconds. She sank to her knees, rain mingling with the tears she hadn't noticed falling. Jamal's voice echoed in her head, his promise of tomorrow's headline now a fragile thread. She flipped open the folder, scanning the bribe records again, her fingers smudging the ink. This was her weapon, her way out. Pratt's name glared, back at her, a spider at the center of this web. But how had Carver known? A snitch, she realized, bile rising in her throat. Someone had sold her out, and Pratt's reach stretched deeper than she'd feared. Her safe house idea was dead. They'd be waiting there too. She wiped her face, resolve hardening like steel. She'd get this to the press herself, no matter the cost. The alley was silent now, rain softening to a drizzle. But she heard boots. In the distance, a faint echo growing closer. She staggered up, shoving the folder into her waistband, and slipped into the shadows, a ghost in her own city. Her mind churned as she moved, weaving through back streets, sticking to the dark where streetlights flickered out. Pratt's counterattack had been swift, ruthless, turning her moment of triumph into a death trap. She pictured him in his corner office, silver hair catching the light, laughing as he sicked Carver on her like a rabid hound. The hospital wasn't just fighting her. It was erasing her, painting her as a criminal to bury the truth. Her leg ached, a dull pulse that matched her heartbeat, but she pushed on, fueled by fury. Jamal's cry replayed, a knife twisting in her gut. Had he survived? She couldn't go back, not yet. The folder was her lifeline, proof Pratt couldn't dodge forever. She'd find a payphone, Call the paper. Get this out before they cornered. Her again. A neon sign flickered ahead, a dive bar's promise of shelter. She ducked inside, the air thick with smoke and sour beer, and scanned the room. A payphone hung on the wall, grimy but working. She fished quarters from her pocket, hands shaking as she dialed the newsroom, whispering to a sleepy editor about Pratt's bribes. "Check your facts," she said, hanging up before he could ask her name. She exhaled, leaning against the wall, the folder digging into her hip. It was done, she thought. The story would break, and she'd be free. Then the TV above the bar blinked on, a breaking news alert cutting through the jukebox's wail. Her face flashed on screen, a mugshot from the station, followed by Pratt's voice, oily and calm. "Latoya Jenkins is dangerous," he said. "We've linked her to a gang torching her home tonight. Stay vigilant." Her blood ran cold, the bar's patrons turning to stare. Keisha's house, she realized, horror sinking in. Pratt had burned her sister's life to ash and pinned it on her. She stumbled out, rain stinging her face, the folder now a lead weight. Pratt's retaliation wasn't just a lawsuit or a chase, it was total war, stripping her of everything. Keisha's home, her sanctuary, gone, and the city would hunt her for it. She gripped the papers tighter, knuckles whitening. She'd escaped. Carver's bullets, but this was worse, a blow that cut deeper than any gun. Her victory had been a mirage, and Pratt's shadow loomed larger, a titan who'd rather destroy her family than lose. She vanished into the night, a fugitive with nowhere left to run, her fight now a desperate scramble for survival. Latoya Jenkins stumbled through the pre-dawn haze of a Birmingham suburb, her sneakers crunching on gravel as the acrid stench of smoke hit her like a punch. The sky glowed orange ahead, a sickly smear against the fading stars, and her gut twisted with a dread she couldn't shake. Keisha's house, her sister's sanctuary, loomed into view, or what was left of it. Charred beams jutted from the ruins like broken bones. The roof caved in, windows shattered into jagged teeth. Flames licked the edges still, defiant, despite the drizzle that had followed her from the alley. She froze, legs trembling, the folder of Pratt's bribe records slipping in her sweaty grip. This was her fault, she knew it. The price of her whistleblowing splashed across Keisha's life in ash and soot. Vernon Pratt's gang had torched it, the news had said, pinning it on her, a lie so bold it burned hotter than the fire itself. She staggered forward, breath hitching, and saw Keisha crumpled on the lawn, a blanket draped over her shoulders, sobbing into her hands. Latoya's throat closed, guilt clawing her raw. She dropped to her knees beside Keisha, the damp grass soaking her jeans, and reached out, fingers trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, voice cracking like the wood still smoldering behind them. Keisha's head snapped up, eyes red and swollen, tears carving tracks through the soot on her cheeks. "You did this," she choked out, shoving Latoya's hand away. "They came for me because of you." The words sliced deep, sharper than the glass at the rally, and Latoya flinched, her chest caving under the weight. She'd dragged Keisha into this, her baby sister who'd never asked for a war. The house had been their anchor, a two-bedroom haven bought with years of overtime, filled with photos and Keisha's kid drawings pinned to the fridge. Now it was gone, and Latoya's fight had lit the match. She clenched her fists, nails biting her palms. "I'll fix this," she said, voice hardening. "Pratt won't get away with it." Keisha just stared, her sobs fading to a hollow silence, and Latoya vowed it then, a promise etched in the ashes. She'd make him pay, no matter what it took. A car rumbled up, headlights slicing through the smoke, and Latoya tensed, ready to bolt. But it was Jamal Reed, his wiry frame hunched as he climbed out, a bandage peeking from his sleeve where Carver's raid had grazed him. He'd survived barely, and relief flooded her, a brief balm against the wreckage. "Found something," he said, limping over, his voice rough but steady. "Hospital security footage from last year. Shows you saving a black patient they left to die. It's gold." Latoya's pulse quickened, hope flaring bright. She took the USB he offered, her fingers brushing his, and nodded. "Get it to the news," she said, already picturing Pratt's face when it aired. Jamal hobbled back to his car, promising it'd hit the morning broadcast, and she turned to Keisha, gripping her shoulder. "This'll prove I'm not the monster they say," she said. But Keisha pulled away again, her silence a wall Latoya couldn't breach. The footage was her lifeline, a chance to claw back the truth, and she clung to it as sirens wailed in the distance, a faint but growing threat. By sunrise, the story broke, a local station blaring the grainy footage across Birmingham. Latoya, watched from a gas station TV, huddled under a borrowed hoodie, the screen showing her in scrubs, rushing a gurney through a crowded ward, shouting for help that never came. The patient, an elderly black man, wheezed through an oxygen mask she'd slapped on herself, defying orders to let him fade. The anchor's voice cut in, crisp and urgent. New evidence contradicts claims against Latoya Jenkins, suggesting a cover-up at Birmingham General. Latoya's lips twitched, a flicker of triumph warming her chest. Crowds gathered downtown again, smaller but fiercer, signs waving high. Latoya was right. She exhaled, leaning against the counter, the folder still tucked in her waistband. Pratt's gang hit had backfired, hadn't it? She'd turned the tide, shown the city who the real villain was. Keisha might hate her, but this could rebuild what they'd lost brick by brick. The gas station door chimed and she glanced up, expecting a customer. Instead, Officer Dwayne Carver stormed in, his badge flashing under the fluorescent lights. 2 deputies at his heels. Her stomach dropped, the air thickening with menace. "Keisha Jenkins," he barked, voice dripping with false authority. "You're under arrest for harboring a fugitive." Latoya's mind reeled, a scream lodging in her throat. They weren't here for her. They were taking Keisha. She stepped forward, fists balled, but Carver's hand shot to his holster, freezing her in place. "Move and you're next," he said, eyes glinting with cruel delight. Through the window, she saw Keisha dragged from the lawn, cuffs snapping on her wrists, her blanket falling into the mud. Latoya's knees buckled, rage and helplessness warring inside her. She'd won the footage battle, but Pratt had struck deeper, ripping her family apart to keep her down. The deputies hauled Keisha into a squad car, her cries muffled as the door slammed shut. Carver lingered, turning to Latoya with a smirk that curdled her blood. "Your sister's a criminal now, just like you," he said, tapping his radio. "Pratt says hi." He sauntered out, leaving her alone with the TV's drone. The victory. Broadcast now a hollow echo. She sank to the floor, the USB digging into her palm, and pounded the tiles, a guttural yell tearing from her chest. Pratt wasn't desperate. He was a chess master, sacrificing pawns to corner her. Then the screen flickered, the anchor's face replaced by Pratt's, live from a press conference. "Latoya Jenkins burned her own sister's home," he said. "Voice smooth as silk. We've got proof and she'll face justice." Her breath stopped, eyes widening. "Proof?" The footage she'd fought for vanished from the feed, wiped from the server like it had never existed. A technical glitch, they'd claim later. She staggered up, clutching the counter, her reflection warped in the glass. Pratt had erased her. Wynne turned her into an arsonist overnight and taken Keisha as collateral. The gas station clerk eyed her, reaching for a phone, and she bolted, the door banging behind her. Her sneakers slapped the wet pavement, each step a fight against collapse. The folder and USB her only weapons now. Keisha's arrest replayed in her mind. Carver's smirk a brand on her soul. How had Pratt pulled this off so fast? She'd underestimated. Him thought the footage would cripple him, but he'd spun it into a noose around her neck. The city's edges blurred as she ran, smoke still clinging to her clothes, a reminder of what she'd lost. Crowds might rally again, but Pratt's lie was louder, and Keisha was paying the price. She ducked into a vacant lot, weeds brushing her thighs, and crouched behind a rotting fence. Her chest heaved, breath fogging in the cool dawn, and she pulled, out the folder, flipping through Jamal's records. The bribes stared back, a lifeline she'd cling to, but the footage's loss gnawed at her. Pratt's reach was a hydra, cutting one head only to grow 2 more, and Carver was his blade, slicing her life apart. She'd thought she'd won, tasted it for a fleeting hour, but this was war now, personal and vicious. Keisha's sobs echoed in her ears, a fuel that turned her fear to fire. She'd get her sister back, expose Pratt's empire, even if it killed her. Comment number 1 if you think Latoya's fight is worth it despite the cost to her family. Hit like and subscribe if you believe she'll rise from this ashes, because the next twist will test her like never before. Can a sister's love survive a city's hate when the mob comes calling? Fog draped the Birmingham outskirts forest like a shroud, thick and grey, muffling the world into an eerie hush. Latoya Jenkins darted through the underbrush, her sneakers sinking into damp earth, each step a jolt of pain through her battered legs. Twigs snapped underfoot, loud as gunshots in her ears, and she winced, glancing back into the mist. The mob was out there, a faceless roar of rage fueled by Vernon Pratt's latest lie. She'd torched Keisha's house, a monster in nurse's scrubs. Her chest burned, lungs clawing for air, but she kept moving, the folder of bribe records and Jamal's USB tucked tight against her ribs. She'd fled the vacant lot when headlights had swept too close, the city's edges no longer safe. Now, in this tangle of pines and shadows, she was prey, hunted by neighbors turned executioners. Keisha's arrest replayed in her mind, Carver's smirk a fresh wound, but she shoved it down. She had to survive this, for her sister, for the truth. Her breath fogged in the chill, a white plume she tried to stifle as she crouched behind a gnarled oak. Shouts echoed through the trees, distant but closing, a chorus of "Get her" and "Burn her" that twisted her gut. She'd thought the footage would save her, but Pratt had erased it, spun her into an arsonist overnight. The folder was her lifeline, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. She needed more, something undeniable. Her hand brushed a folded paper in. Her pocket, a tip from a cellmate back at the station. A nurse named Tasha had seen Pratt's neglect firsthand, kept quiet out of fear. Latoya had tracked her down yesterday, a hushed call from a payphone, and Tasha had agreed to talk, to write it all down. The affidavit was on its way to a reporter, a bombshell that could flip this nightmare. She clung to that, a flicker of light in the dark, believing it'd scatter the mob and bury Pratt's lies. Headlights pierced the fog, a pickup truck rumbling down a dirt path 50 yards off. Latoya ducked lower, heart hammering as boots hit the ground, voices barking orders. "Spread out, she's close," a man yelled, his drawl thick with venom. She recognized him, a neighbor from Keisha's street, a guy who'd waved at her over the fence last summer. Now he wielded a flashlight like a sword, hunting her for a fire she didn't set. She slipped deeper into the woods, mud sucking at her shoes, until she reached a clearing where a rusted shed sagged against a tree. She pried the door open, wincing at the creak, and slid inside, the air stale with mildew and oil. Her fingers shook as she pulled out her burner phone, texting the reporter, "Got Tasha's affidavit, air it now." She hit send, praying the E signal held and sank against the wall. The affidavit's promise a shield against the chaos outside. Minutes stretched into an eternity, the mob's shouts growing louder, then faltering. She peeked through a cracked window, fog swirling around silhouettes that paused, heads tilting toward radios. Her phone buzzed, a grainy live stream flickering on the screen. The anchor's voice cut through static. Breaking news. An affidavit. From a Birmingham General nurse alleges CEO Vernon Pratt ordered neglect of black patients, corroborating Latoya Jenkins' claims. Tasha's words scrolled across, typed in stark black. "He told us to let them die, save the beds for whites." Latoya's breath caught, a rush of triumph flooding her veins. The mob's lights wavered, voices dropping to murmurs as shame crept in. She stepped out, legs unsteady but head high, watching them scatter into the mist, their fury snuffed out by truth. She'd done it, turned them back, her chest swelling with a victory she could taste. The forest fell silent, pine needles dripping in the stillness, and Latoya exhaled, leaning against the shed. Tasha's affidavit had hit like a thunderclap, and she imagined Pratt squirming in his office, his silver hair damp with sweat. She'd outrun the mob, proved she wasn't the villain they'd painted. Her fingers brushed the folder, still safe, and she pictured Keisha hearing this, maybe softening in her cell. She started back toward the city, weaving through trees, the fog lifting to reveal a pale dawn. She'd find Jamal, regroup, hit Pratt harder. This was her moment, wasn't it? Then a new sound broke the quiet, a low hum growing into a roar. She spun, eyes widening as a news chopper swooped low, its spotlight blinding her. The TV crackled back to life in her hand, Pratt's face filling the screen, live and venomous. "Latoya Jenkins is a fraud," he said, voice steady despite the affidavit's sting. "We've got video proof she planted the firebomb that burned her sister's home." The feed cut to grainy footage, a figure in a hoodie tossing a Molotov. Through Keisha's window, flames erupting in a sickening bloom. Latoya's stomach dropped, the air sucked from her lungs. It wasn't her, couldn't be, but the hoodie matched hers, the build too close to deny. Pratt's voice droned on, "She's a danger to us all," and the mob's shouts reignited, closer now, fueled by fresh hate. She stumbled back, the chopper's beam pinning her like a bug, and tires screeched as trucks roared into the clearing. Carver leapt out, shotgun cocked, his grin a slash of white in the dawn. "Told you you'd slip up," he bellowed, advancing as the mob surged behind him, bats and bottles glinting in their hands. Latoya ran, legs pumping through the mud, the affidavit's triumph ashes in her mouth. The video was fake, had to be, but Pratt had played it perfectly, twisting her win into a death sentence. She darted behind a thicket, thorns tearing her sleeves, and heard a blast, the shed exploding in a fireball that singed her back. Her phone tumbled free, shattering on a rock, the live stream dying with it. She scrambled on, ears ringing, the folder slipping loose but snatched back in a panic. The reporter's car, she realized, dread sinking in. Pratt had torched it, killed the affidavit's source, a message carved in flames. No evidence survives her. The mob closed in, their roars a wall of sound, and she dove into a ditch, mud swallowing her up to her waist. Her breath came in gasps. The chopper's thrum overhead a relentless pulse. She pressed herself flat, the cold muck seeping into her bones, and clutched the folder tighter, its edges soggy but intact. Pratt's counterattack was a sledgehammer, smashing her victory into dust, and Carver led the charge, his shotgun a promise of death. The mob's lights danced through the trees, closer with every heartbeat, and she bit her lip, tasting blood. She'd thought Tasha's words would end this, but Pratt had turned her own shadow against her, a doppelganger in that video damning her beyond reason. Her back burned, the explosion's heat a lingering scar, and she cursed her naivety. They weren't desperate. They were relentless, a machine grinding her down. She crawled deeper into the ditch, the water numbing her legs, and squinted into the fog. A shadow moved ahead, not mob, not Carver, but something else, a figure watching. Friend or foe, she couldn't tell, but it was her only shot. She hauled herself up, mud dripping from her hands, and staggered toward it, the mob's cries a tidal wave at her back. Pratt's video looped in her mind, a lie so vivid it had convinced a city, and she choked on the irony. She'd dodged their bottles at the rally, outrun Carver's bullets in the alley, but this was worse, a trap that turned her own fight into her execution. The figure vanished into the trees, and she followed, desperation driving her forward. The folder and USB were all she had left, soaked but alive. Proof Pratt couldn't burn away yet. She'd lost the affidavit, the reporter, maybe Keisha's trust, but not her will. The mob's lights flared behind her, Carver's voice barking, "Orders?" And she pushed on, a fugitive in a forest-turned battlefield. Her next move a gamble against a titan who'd never stop. Darkness swallowed the deserted Birmingham warehouse, its shadows thick and jagged, pooling around rusted machinery and broken crates like spilled ink. Latoya Jenkins crouched behind a dented steel drum, her breath shallow, each inhale tasting of dust and decay. Her soaked nurse's jacket clung to her, mud from the forest ditch caked into every crease, the folder of bribe records and Jamal's USB pressed tight against her chest. Her legs ached, cuts from the mob's chase pulsing with every heartbeat, but she forced the pain down, eyes darting to the warehouse's shattered windows. The chopper's roar had faded after she'd slipped the mob in the woods, that mystery figure vanishing into the fog, leaving her to stumble here, a crumbling refuge on the city's edge. Pratt's fake video looped in her mind, a hooded ghost, torching Keisha's house, pinning her as a criminal mastermind. Now the law hunted her. shoot-on-sight orders crackling over police radios, Vernon Pratt's lies turning Birmingham into a kill zone. She gritted her teeth, fury a live wire in her veins. She'd make them pay, but first, she had to survive. Footsteps echoed outside, heavy and deliberate, boots scuffing the gravel lot. Latoya's pulse spiked, her hand tightening on the folder. She'd lost Tasha's affidavit to the reporters. Fiery grave. But Jamal's evidence was still hers, a lifeline she'd wield like a blade. She needed to expose Pratt's hold on the law, prove he'd bought the DA to bury her. Jamal had survived Carver's alley raid, and she'd texted him from a stolen burner as she'd fled the forest, begging for more. He'd replied fast, promising. Hospital payrolls linking Pratt to dirty cops, a hack he'd pulled off in the chaos. She'd craft a plan here in this rotting shell and hit back harder. A flashlight beam sliced through a window, sweeping the floor 10 feet away, and she ducked lower, heart hammering. Was it Carver, sniffing her trail like a bloodhound? She held her breath, the beam passing, and exhaled when a car engine growled to life outside. Jamal's text buzzed in her pocket. Payrolls sent to news. Carver's tied to Pratt. Stay alive. She crept to a grimy window, peering through a crack as the car rolled off, a beat-up sedan she recognized as Jamal's. Relief loosened her shoulders, a rare moment of calm in the storm. He'd done it, risked his neck again, and she pictured the headlines, CEO bribes police, targets whistleblower. She sank against the wall, pulling out the burner to check the news feed. The story was live, a grainy screenshot of payrolls flashing on screen. Carver's name bolded next to a $5,000 payout. The anchor's voice was sharp, cutting through static. Officer Dwayne Carver, suspended pending investigation into corruption at Birmingham General. Latoya's lips curled, a smirk breaking through the exhaustion. Suspension wasn't jail, but it was a crack in Pratt's armor, a hit she'd landed from the shadows. She'd emerge soon, she told herself. Let the city see her alive, fighting. This was her chance, wasn't it? The warehouse creaked, wind whistling through its bones, and she stood, stretching her cramped legs. Carver off the streets meant breathing room, a sliver of safety to plan her next move. She'd get the folder to a lawyer, pair it with the payrolls, and bury Pratt in court. Her fingers brushed the USB, still dry despite the mud. A tiny victory. In her pocket. She paced the concrete, mapping it out, her sneakers leaving wet smears behind. Keisha's face flashed in her mind, cuffed and broken, and she swallowed hard. This win was for her sister too, a step toward freedom. The air felt lighter, the shadows less suffocating, and she allowed herself a breath, deep and steady. Then the floor shook, a rumble growing into a thunderous crash as floodlights blazed through every window, pinning her in blinding white. "Latoya Jenkins!" a megaphone boomed, voice cold and mechanical. "You're surrounded. Come out now, or we come in." Her stomach plummeted, ice flooding her veins. She darted to the window, squinting past the glare, and saw SWAT vans circling the lot, black-clad figures spilling out, rifles glinting in the night. Carver stood front and center, unsuspended, his shotgun propped on his shoulder, a grin splitting his face. "Thought you'd hide, huh?" he shouted, voice dripping with glee. "Pratt says you're armed and dangerous, and I've got orders to take you down." Latoya's mind spun, panic clawing her throat. The payrolls had aired, hadn't they? Suspension was live news, so how was he here leading this? She stumbled back, tripping over a crate, the folder slipping but caught mid-fall. This wasn't a mistake. It was Pratt's counterpunch, fast and lethal. Gunfire erupted, bullets shredding the walls, splintering wood and metal in a deafening storm. Latoya dove behind the drum, curling tight as shards rained down, slicing her cheek. The air thickened with dust and cordite, choking her as she crawled, heart pounding against her ribs. She heard a scream, raw and close, and peeked out to see Jamal sprinting from the shadows, a laptop under his arm, shouting her name. "They hacked it back," he yelled, voice cracking. "Payroll's gone, suspension lifted." A shot rang out, precise and brutal, and he crumpled, blood blooming on his chest, the laptop skidding across the concrete. Latoya's scream lodged in her throat, horror pinning her as his body twitched, then stilled. She lunged forward, dragging him behind the drum, his weight heavy and limp, his breath a wet rattle, fading fast. Tears stung her eyes, mixing with the blood trickling down her face, but she forced them back, cradling Jamal's head. His eyes fluttered, a weak hand grabbing hers. "Keep fighting," he rasped, then went slack, the light draining from him. She choked on a sob, fury roaring over the grief, and grabbed the folder and USB, shoving them into her waistband. Bullets whizzed past, one grazing her arm. A hot streak of pain she ignored. She hauled Jamal's body deeper into the warehouse, ducking behind a conveyor belt, his blood slick on her hands. Carver's voice boomed again. "No escape, Jenkins!" And she heard boots storming the entrance, a tidal wave of black armor crashing in. She bolted, weaving through machinery, the SWAT team's beams slashing the dark, their shouts a relentless drumbeat. Her arm burned, her legs screamed, but she pushed on, spotting a rusted hatch in the floor. She pried it open, the screech of metal lost in the gunfire, and dropped into a dank crawl space, pulling the hatch shut. Her breath came in gasps, the air sour with mold, and she crawled. Elbows scraping concrete, Jamal's death a weight on her soul. Pratt had erased the payrolls, flipped the suspension, turned her win into a slaughter. She'd underestimated. Him again thought the news would hold. But he'd bought the system whole, cops and all. The folder was soggy now. The USB her last shard of proof, and she clutched them tight, vowing revenge. Carver's SWAT dogs were above, their boots thudding, but she'd slipped them, for now. She emerged in an alley, rain washing Jamal's. Blood from her hands, and staggered upright, a ghost in her own war. Pratt's trap had taken her friend, left her hunted, but she wasn't broken yet. She limped into the night, the warehouse a fiery silhouette behind her, sirens wailing in the distance. Jamal's last words echoed, a command she'd honor even as grief gnawed her raw. Pratt's reach was a noose tightening with every move, and Carver was his executioner, unleashed to end her. She'd thought suspension would slow them, but this was total war, a machine that crushed evidence and lives alike. Her arm throbbed, a reminder of how close she'd come, but she straightened, resolve hardening like steel. Comment number 1 if you think Latoya's lost too much to give up now. Hit like and subscribe if you believe she'll avenge Jamal's sacrifice, because this fight's about to get bloodier. What happens when a friend's death lights a fire that even betrayal can't quench? Neon flickered outside the dingy Birmingham motel, its pink and green buzz casting a sickly glow through the torn curtains. Latoya Jenkins slumped against the wall, her mud-caked nurse's jacket discarded on the sagging bed, the room's stale, air heavy with mildew and despair. Her arm throbbed where the SWAT bullet had grazed her, a jagged red line she'd bandaged with a torn pillowcase, blood seeping through in dark blooms. The folder of bribe records and Jamal's USB sat on the chipped nightstand, her last threads of hope now stained with his blood. She stared at them, eyes burning from tears she refused to shed, Jamal's lifeless body replaying in her mind. He died in her arms, shot down by Carver's raid, his sacrifice a weight that crushed her chest. She was alone now, a fugitive, in a city that wanted her dead, Vernon Pratt's lies turning every shadow into a threat. Her fingers flexed, stiff with dried mud, and she whispered his name, a vow to keep fighting, even as grief gnawed her hollow. The motel was a last-ditch hideout, found after she'd limped from the warehouse alley, dodging sirens that wailed like hounds on her scent. Keisha was in jail, Jamal gone, and Pratt's machine kept spinning, framing her for murder now, his fake video and payroll erasure tightening the noose. She'd thought the payrolls would cripple him, but he'd flipped it, made her a cop killer, in the public's eye. Her chest tightened, rage simmering beneath the exhaustion. She couldn't trust the streets, the news, anyone, not after the mob, the SWAT, Pratt's endless reach. Then a knock rattled the door, soft but urgent, and she tensed, hand grabbing a cracked lamp as a weapon. "Latoya, it's me," a voice hissed, familiar and warm. Marla, a nurse from Birmingham General, her round face peering through the curtain gap, eyes wide with worry. Latoya exhaled, dropping the lamp, and cracked the door, letting her in. Marla slipped inside, locking the bolt behind her, her scrubs wrinkled and stained with coffee. She was 40, soft-spoken, a friend from the late shifts who'd seen Pratt's Neglect, too, but stayed quiet. "Heard about Jamal," she said, voice trembling, setting a plastic bag on the bed. "Brought you food, clothes, a fake ID. You can't stay here long." Latoya's throat closed, gratitude warring with suspicion, but she nodded, tearing into the bag. A sandwich, a hoodie, a driver's license with Tamika Brown in bold print. "Why risk this?" she asked, voice rough, eyeing Marla's nervous hands. "Because you're right," Marla said, meeting her gaze. "Pratt's a monster and I'm done hiding. I'll get you out of Birmingham, somewhere safe." Latoya's shoulders eased, a flicker of hope warming her chest. She wasn't alone after all, was she? Marla's kindness felt like a lifeline, a chance to breathe, to regroup. They sat on the bed, the mattress groaning under their weight, and Latoya wolfed down the sandwich, mustard smearing her fingers. Marla unfolded a plan. A cousin's car, waiting 2 blocks away, a route to Montgomery, a burner phone to call ahead. "You'll disappear," she said, handing over the keys, her smile shaky but real. Latoya wiped her mouth, the food settling her stomach, and pulled on the hoodie, its clean cotton a stark contrast to her filth. She slipped the folder and USB into the pocket, feeling their weight like anchors. "Thank you," she said, voice cracking, and Marla squeezed her hand, a sisterly grip that steadied her. She stood, testing her legs, the graze on her arm a dull ache now. With Marla's help, she'd slip Pratt's net, maybe even get Keisha out. The motel's neon buzzed louder, a comforting hum, and she let herself believe it. A taste of safety. After weeks of hell, then the door exploded inward, wood splintering as Officer Dwayne Carver stormed through, his pistol raised, eyes glinting with triumph. Latoya lunged for the lamp, but he was faster, his free hand slamming her face first into the wall, the crack of her cheek against plaster ringing in her ears. Stars burst behind her eyes, pain blooming hot and sharp, and she crumpled, the hoodie tangling around her arms. "Gotcha!" Carver snarled, his boot pinning her wrist, grinding until she gasped. 2 more cops burst in, rifles trained, their shouts a chaotic blur. She twisted, vision swimming, and saw Marla frozen by the bed, hands up, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," Marla sobbed, voice breaking. "They paid me, threatened my kids. I had no choice." Latoya's blood ran cold. Betrayal, slicing deeper than Carver's grip, a knife twisting in her gut. Marla had sold her out, her kindness a trap, and she'd walked right in. Carver hauled her up, pistol whipping her across the temple, a blow that sent her reeling into the nightstand, the folder and USB skittering across the floor. Her head throbbed, blood trickling warm down her cheek, but she clawed at him, nails, raking his arm. He laughed, a guttural sound, and slammed her back down, cuffs snapping tight around her wrists, cutting into the old bruises. "Shoulda run farther," he said, dragging her toward the door, her sneakers scraping the carpet. Marla sank to her knees, sobbing louder, but Latoya didn't look at her, couldn't. The sting of trust shattered, burning worse than the blows. The cops grabbed her evidence, tossing it into a bag, and she kicked, a wild swing that caught Carver's shin, earning her a fist to the ribs that stole her breath. She wheezed, doubled over as they shoved her into the hall, the neon flickering mockingly overhead. The squad car waited outside, its engine rumbling, and Carver threw her into the back, the door slamming with a finality that echoed in her skull. She slumped against the seat, head spinning, the taste of blood thick on her tongue. Through the window she saw Marla stumble out, clutching the bag she'd brought, her sobs fading into the night. Pratt's shadow loomed in her mind, a puppeteer pulling strings she couldn't see, and now he'd turned her last ally against her. The car lurched forward, weaving through Birmingham's dark streets, and Carver's radio crackled, his voice smug as he reported her in. She'd been so close, the fake ID a ticket to freedom, but Marla's betrayal had snatched it away, a wound deeper than any bullet. Her ribs ached, her face a map of bruises, but she glared at Carver's reflection in the rear view, defiance flickering through the haze. They pulled into the station, the same brick hellhole she'd escaped before, and Carver yanked her out, his grip bruising her arm anew. The cell door clanged open, and he shoved her inside, the concrete cold against her palms as she fell. "Go enjoy your stay," he said, tossing the bag with her evidence onto a desk outside, his grin a promise of worse to come. She crawled to the bench, head pounding, and sank down, the cuffs digging into her wrists. Then Pratt appeared at the bars, his silver hair pristine, his suit unruffled, a king surveying his prisoner. "You're a pest," he said, voice smooth as oil. "But pests get crushed. That guard you killed in your escape? Death penalty's on the table now." Latoya's eyes widened, horror sinking in as he turned away, his laugh echoing down the hall. She stared at the bars, the cell's damp walls closing in, Pratt's words a noose tightening around her neck. A guard dead? She hadn't escaped, she'd been caught, but he'd staged it, framed her for a murder that never happened. Her hands shook, the folder and USB gone, Marla's sobs a ghost in her ears. Pratt's retaliation was surgical, stripping her of hope, of allies, of life itself. She'd trusted Marla, let her guard down, and now she faced execution, a lie so bold it'd bury her alive. Her cheek pulsed, blood drying in sticky trails, and she clenched her jaw, fury rising through the despair. They'd taken everything, but she wasn't dead yet. She'd find a way, claw her way out, even if it was her last act. The station hummed outside, a machine grinding her down, but she sat taller, a spark refusing to die. The Birmingham prison cell was a tomb of grey concrete, its air stale with the tang of sweat and despair. The faint drip of a leaky pipe, the only sound breaking the silence. Latoya Jenkins sat on the metal bench, her wrists raw from cuffs that had been swapped for tighter ones, the bruises on her face throbbing in time with her heartbeat. Her nurse's jacket was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on her frame, its fabric rough against her grazed arm. Blood crusted her cheek where Carver had pistol-whipped her, a dull ache radiating from her ribs where his fist had landed. Vernon Pratt's voice echoed in her skull, his gloating promise of a death penalty for a guard she'd never killed, a staged jailbreak she'd never pulled off. Marla's betrayal burned hotter than the pain, her sobbed excuse of no choice a lie that had delivered Latoya here, stripped of the folder and USB, her last shards of proof now in Pratt's hands. She stared at the bars, eyes narrowed, defiance simmering beneath the exhaustion. They'd framed her for murder, but she wasn't dead yet. The cell block buzzed faintly, muffled shouts and clangs filtering through the walls, a distant reminder of the world she'd been torn from. Keisha was somewhere in this maze, locked up for harboring her, and Jamal's blood stained her memory, his death a wound that wouldn't close. Pratt's machine had chewed through her life, spitting her out as a cop killer, a lie so bold it'd turned Birmingham against her. She flexed her fingers, testing their strength, and replayed her last moments with Marla, the fake ID a cruel mirage of freedom. Then a shadow fell across the bars, a cellmate shuffling in, a wiry woman with a scar, slicing her eyebrow, her eyes sharp as glass. "Heard about you," she muttered, voice low, sitting opposite Latoya. "They're saying you off to guard. Bullshit, right?" Latoya nodded, jaw tight. "Pratt set it up," she said, and the woman smirked, leaning closer. "I know a way to hit back. Guard's lazy, brags about Pratt's orders. Smuggle a letter out, spill it." Latoya's pulse quickened, a spark igniting in the dark. She'd lost her evidence, but this was something, a crack in the wall. The cellmate, D, slipped her a stubby pencil and a scrap of paper torn from a Bible page, the edges ragged but clean. "Write fast," D said, glancing at the corridor. Latoya scribbled, her hand shaking but steady enough, detailing Pratt's staged escape. The guard's death a fabrication, Carver's brutality a tool in his arsenal. She folded it tight, passing it back, and D tucked it into her sock, promising a kitchen worker would get it to a journalist. "They'll eat this up," D said, and Latoya leaned back, a grim smile tugging her lips. She'd fight from this hole, claw her way out with words if she had to. Pratt thought he'd silenced her, but she'd scream louder even from behind bars. Hours bled into a day, the cell's dim light unchanging, but the air shifted, a hum of unrest seeping through the walls. D returned from a work shift, her scarred face alight with news. "It's out," she whispered, crouching close. "Your letter hit the papers. Protests outside, big ones." Latoya's chest swelled, a rush of triumph cutting through the gloom. She pictured the headlines. Whistleblower framed by CEO. Crowds chanting her name again. Not as a villain, but a victim. The cell block erupted. Inmates banging trays, shouting her story through the bars. A ripple of chaos that echoed her fight. She stood, pacing the tiny space, her jumpsuit chafing, but her spirit lifting. Pratt's death penalty threat loomed. But this was power, a wave she'd started from a scrap of paper. She'd turned the tide, hadn't she? The system couldn't ignore this, not with the city watching. The door clanged open, and Officer Dwayne Carver stormed in, his broad frame, filling the cell, his shotgun dangling loose but menacing. Latoya froze, instinct screaming danger, but she held her ground, chin up. "Heard you're stirring shit again," he growled, his pale eyes glinting with hate. "Protests won't save you." He tossed something through the bars, a glinting object that clattered on the concrete, and she stepped back, dread coiling in her gut. A guard's badge smeared with dried blood, its edges sharp as an accusation. "Found this in your bunk," he said, voice dripping with mock surprise. Loud, enough for Dee to hear. "Guess who it belonged to?" Latoya's stomach dropped, her mind racing. She hadn't touched it, hadn't seen it, but Carver's grin told her everything. Pratt had planted it, another layer to his frame-up, and Carver was the hammer driving the nail. Dee shrank back, eyes wide, her trust wavering, and Latoya's heart sank. The cellmate's doubt a fresh cut. "It's a lie," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. But Carver laughed, a harsh bark that bounced off the walls. "Tell it to the warden," he said, slamming the bars with his fist. "Solitary for you, Jenkins. No more letters, no more games." He signaled down the hall, and 2 guards marched in, their faces blank, but their grips iron as they seized. Her arms dragging her from the cell. She kicked, heels scraping the floor, shouting, "You won't bury me!" But Carver just watched, his smirk a promise of doom. The corridor blurred past, inmates' faces pressing against bars, some cheering, some silent, and she clung to the protests outside, a lifeline slipping away. The solitary cell was a coffin 6 feet by 8, its walls slick with damp, the air thick with a sour rot that stung her nose. They shoved her in, uncuffing her only to slam the steel door, the clang a death knell in her ears. She stumbled to the cot, its thin mattress reeking of mildew, and sank down, her bruised cheek pulsing against the cold concrete wall. The badge, replayed in her mind, Pratt's planter masterstroke, turning her letter's win into a trap. She'd sparked outrage, but he'd snuffed it, locked her in this hole where no one could hear. Her ribs ached, a reminder of Carver's fist, and she pressed a hand there, steadying her breath. Then the slot in the door slid open, Carver's voice slithering through. "Public's turning," he said, smug as ever. "Pratt's got a confession, says you wrote it. They want you fried now." Latoya's blood ran cold, her hands clenching the cot's edge until her knuckles whitened. A confession? She hadn't written anything but the letter, but Pratt's machine had forged it. A final twist to sway the protests, the city, the world. She pictured it. Her name scrawled on a lie. "I killed the guard," broadcast to every screen. Drowning. Her truth in venom. Her breath hitched, fury and fear warring in her chest, and she pounded the wall, a dull thud against the silence. Carver's footsteps faded, leaving her alone with the dripping pipe, the weight of Pratt's noose tightening. She'd fought from nothing, sparked a fire, but he'd doused it, turned her own words against her. Her cheek bled anew, a slow drip onto the cot, and she stared at it, resolve hardening through the haze. They'd locked her away, but she'd find a crack, a whisper, anything to fight back. The cell's walls pressed in, a vice on her spirit, but she straightened, wiping the blood with her sleeve. Pratt's confession was a lie, but it was out there, poisoning the air she'd ignited. She'd lost the folder, Jamal, Marla's trust, and now this, a frame so tight it'd choke her dead. Her fingers traced the cot's edge, plotting, searching, for a way. The protests might fade, but she wouldn't, not while she had breath. Comment number 1. If you think Latoya's been betrayed one too many times by a system rigged to silence her, hit like and subscribe if you believe she'll claw her way out of this grave, because the next chapter's a fight you won't see coming. What happens when the public's voice turns into a death chant and a cell becomes a battleground? The solitary cell in Birmingham Prison was a suffocating box, its slick concrete walls glistening with damp, the air heavy with the sour rot of neglect. Latoya Jenkins sat cross-legged on the thin cot, her orange jumpsuit stained with blood and sweat, the bruises on her face a map of Carver's brutality pulsing in the dim light. Her wrists bore fresh welts from cuffs, her grazed arm a dull ache beneath the bandage, but she ignored the pain, her fingers scratching jagged lines into the wall with a rusted nail she'd pried from the cot's frame. Pratt's fake confession echoed in her ears, a forged "I killed the guard," that had turned the protests outside into a chorus of hate, the city baying for her execution. Vernon Pratt had stripped her of everything, the folder, Jamal, Keisha's trust, and now her voice locking her in this hole where the drip of a leaky pipe mocked her with its endless rhythm. She gritted her teeth, fury a live coal in her chest, and kept scratching, plotting a way out even as the noose tightened. The slot in the door creaked open, a sliver of light cutting through the gloom, and a guard's voice rasped, low and hurried. "Jenkins, you're not alone in here." She froze, nail poised mid-scratch, and squinted at the slot. It was a new face, younger, his brown eyes darting nervously down the hall. "Heard you on the news," he whispered, slipping a folded note through. "Some of us know Pratt's lying. I can get something out." Latoya's pulse spiked, a jolt of hope piercing the despair, and she snatched the note, unfolding it with trembling hands. It was blank, a signal to write, and she grabbed the nail, scrawling fast. "Pratt framed me, staged the guard's death, confessions fake." She passed it back, her breath shallow, and the guard nodded, tucking it into his sleeve. "Got a cousin at the station," he said. "It'll air tonight." The slot snapped shut, leaving her in silence, but she smirked, leaning back. A crack in Pratt's wall, a whisper from the grave. Hours dragged, the cell's damp chill seeping into her bones. But she paced, 3 steps one way, 3 back, her mind racing. The guard's sympathy was a gamble, but she'd take it. Anything to fight the death penalty Pratt had rigged. She pictured Keisha hearing this, maybe believing her again, and clung to that, a lifeline in the dark. The walls hummed faintly, a vibration from beyond, and she pressed her ear to the concrete, straining to hear. Shouts, distant but growing, a rumble of unrest she knew too well. The note had hit, she realized, her smirk widening. She'd sparked. The protests before turned the city's eyes on her, and now she'd do it again from this coffin. The drip quickened, a steady plink that matched her pulse, and she sat, waiting, the nail clutched tight, her weapon against the silence. The cell block erupted near midnight, a clang of steel and a roar of voices shaking the walls. Latoya leapt, up pressing against the bars, as the guard's voice crackled over a radio outside. "Breaking news," it blared. "Whistleblower Latoya Jenkins claims frame-up in leaked note, alleges CEO Vernon Pratt faked guard's death." Her heart soared, a wild thud against her ribs, as the anchor read her words, sharp and clear. "Confession's a lie, I'm innocent." She gripped the bars, knuckles whitening, as the broadcast cut to a reporter outside, sirens wailing behind her. "Protests swell at the prison, demanding Jenkins' trial be delayed," the voice said, and Latoya laughed, a raw, triumphant sound. The crowd's chants filtered through, faint but fierce. "Free Latoya, free Latoya." A tide turning back in her favor. She'd done it, hadn't she? Delayed the execution, bought time to breathe, to fight. The slot slid open again, the guard's face pale but grinning. "Trial's pushed back," he whispered. "Judge can't ignore this." Latoya nodded, her smirk stretching wide, and sank onto the cot, relief washing over her like cool water. Pratt's confession had swayed them, but her note had struck harder, a truth they couldn't bury yet. She flexed her hands, the nail still in her grip, and traced the scratches, a map of her defiance. The protests would keep her alive, force the system to look, and she'd claw her way out piece by piece. The cell felt less like a tomb now, its walls a challenge she'd meet, and she closed her eyes, savoring the win, however small. Then the ground shook, a low rumble growing into a thunderous crash, and her eyes snapped open, dread coiling in her gut. Shouts turned to screams outside, a chaotic swell that drowned the chance, and Latoya leapt to the bars, peering through the slot. Smoke curled in the hall, thick and black, as boots pounded and glass shattered somewhere close. The radio crackled. Again Pratt's voice cutting through, live and oily. "Latoya Jenkins' lies have incited a riot," he said, his tone dripping with crocodile tears. "The guard's family demands justice, and so do I." A woman's sob followed. "She killed my husband. Don't let her trick you." Latoya's stomach dropped. The air sucked from her lungs. Pratt had flipped it again, turned her note into a spark for chaos, and now a mob stormed the prison, their roars a death knell in her ears. She banged the bars, yelling, "It's a set-up!" But the guard was gone, the hall empty save for the smoke. The cell block doors burst open, a flood of bodies surging in, not guards but rioters, their faces twisted with rage, bats and pipes glinting in their hands. "Where's Jenkins?" a man bellowed, his voice raw with hate, and Latoya shrank back, heart pounding against her ribs. They'd come to lynch her, Pratt's lie a match to their fury, and she scanned the cell, the nail her only weapon. The cot was bolted, the walls bare, but she grabbed the mattress, thin and reeking, and wedged it against the bars, a flimsy shield. Boots thundered closer, a pipe smashing a nearby lock, and she braced herself, sweat beading on her brow. She delayed the trial, tasted victory, but Pratt had turned it into a death trap, a mob her executioner before any judge could rule. A face pressed to the slot, eyes wild and bloodshot, a man she didn't know but who knew her name. "You're dead, burner," he spat, slamming a bat against the bars, the mattress shuddering under the blow. Latoya kicked back, aiming for his fingers, and he cursed, pulling away. But more came, a wave of hate crashing against her cell. She ducked as a bottle flew through, shattering on the wall, glass spraying her legs, fresh cuts stinging through the jumpsuit. The smoke thickened, choking her, and she coughed, eyes watering. But she held the mattress, defiance roaring through her veins. Pratt's voice looped in her head, his fake tears a taunt, and she snarled, a guttural sound that matched the mob's fury. They'd kill her here, she knew it, unless she outlasted them, a hope as thin as the cot's frame. The cell shook, a blast rocking the block, and she stumbled, the mattress slipping as flames licked the hall. Pratt's riot wasn't chaos, it was planned, a cover to accidentally end her, and she scrambled up, searching for a way out. The slot was her only window, the mob her only barrier, and she grabbed the nail, jamming it into the lock, twisting with all she had. It bent, useless, and she cursed, hurling it at the bars as the ceiling groaned, dust raining down. The mob surged, a pipe smashing through the mattress, grazing her shoulder, and she fell back, blood trickling warm down her arm. She'd fought. From nothing turned protests into power, but Pratt's trap was closing. A fire and a mob to finish what Carver started. She pressed against the wall, chest heaving, the nail gone, her hands empty, but her will unbroken, a spark in the inferno. Flames roared through the Birmingham prison yard, a fiery beast swallowing the night, its heat searing the air as smoke billowed in choking waves. Latoya Jenkins crouched behind a toppled bench, her orange jumpsuit torn and blood-streaked, the graze on her shoulder oozing red through the fabric. Her face throbbed where the mob's pipe had struck, her grazed arm a pulsing ache, but she gripped a stolen radio, its crackling static her lifeline in the chaos. The riot had erupted from Pratt's lie, his staged victim family plea turning protesters into a lynch mob, storming the cell block to kill her before the delayed trial could start. She'd escaped solitary when a blast had shattered the lock, crawling through smoke and debris, snatching the radio from a fallen guard's belt. Now in the yard she fought off rioters, their bats and bottles a blur of hate, Vernon Pratt's shadow fueling every swing. She ducked as a brick sailed past, shattering against a wall, and gritted her teeth, fury a steel rod in her spine. She'd end this somehow or die trying. The yard was a battlefield, concrete slick with blood and ash, bodies sprawled where guards and inmates had clashed. Shouts rang out, a cacophony of rage and panic, and Latoya darted between shadows, her sneakers crunching glass. The radio was her weapon, a chance to flip Pratt's game, and she'd recorded his voice from the broadcast, his oily tears a confession of manipulation if she could twist it right. She'd hidden the folder and USB in Solitary's wall before. The riot. A desperate stash she couldn't reach now, but this was enough. A spark to turn the tide. Her breath rasped, smoke stinging her lungs, and she slipped behind a burned-out van, its metal hot against her back. The mob surged 50 yards off, a swarm of silhouettes waving torches, their chants of "killer," a knife in her gut. She'd delayed the trial, thought she'd won time, but Pratt had turned it into this. A death trap she'd have to claw through. A rioter lunged from the dark, a hulking man with a bat, his face twisted with Pratt's lies. Latoya swung the radio, cracking it against his jaw, a wet crunch that dropped him cold. His bat clattering free. She snatched it, gripping the wood tight, and ran, weaving through the chaos as flames licked higher, the prison's fences groaning, under the mob's weight. She needed a signal, a way out, and spotted a guard tower, its spotlight shattered but its radio mast intact. Her legs burned, cuts reopening on her shins, but she climbed, the rungs slick with soot, her shoulder screaming. With every pull, at the top, she smashed the radio's casing, twisting wires with trembling hands, and patched into a local frequency, her voice hoarse but fierce. "This is Latoya Jenkins," she broadcast, static popping. "Pratt's lying, hear him yourself." She played his plea, the fake sobs looping, and shouted, "He framed me, burned my sister's house, killed my friend. Don't let him win." The mob faltered, torches dipping as her voice boomed over the yard, cutting through their roars. She held her breath, perched in the tower, watching their silhouettes freeze, heads tilting toward the sound. A woman dropped, her bottle glass shattering, and muttered, "That's Pratt?" Others turned, confusion rippling through, some swinging at Carver's deputies instead, their black vests flashing in the firelight. Latoya's chest swelled, a wild hope surging through her veins. She'd turned them, hadn't she? The radio dangled from her hand, its cracked shell a trophy, and she smirked, tasting a shift in the air. Pratt's lie was crumbling, his own words a noose around his neck, and she'd tied it tight. She slid down the ladder, landing hard, her knees buckling but her spirit soaring. The mob split, half retreating, half fighting Carver's men, and she darted back into the shadows, a ghost in the fray. Then a crack split the night, sharp and close, and pain seared her scalp, a bullet grazing her skull, blood trickling warm down her neck. She stumbled, clutching the bat, and spun to see a sniper's glint on the roof, Pratt's hired gun taking aim. Her vision blurred, the yard tilting, but she dove behind a dumpster, heart pounding against her ribs. The mob's pause was a mirage, Pratt's counter-strike already in motion, and she cursed her hubris, the radio slipping from her grip. Boots thudded nearby, Carver emerging from the smoke, his shotgun raised, his grin a slash of white in the chaos. "Nice try," he bellowed, dragging a rope from his belt, a makeshift noose swinging loose. "Too dangerous to live, Jenkins." He lunged, grabbing her arm, and she swung the bat, cracking his knee, a howl tearing from his throat as he staggered back. She bolted, blood dripping into her eyes, the sniper's next shot pinging off the dumpster, sparking in the dark. The mob roared anew, some turning on her again, Pratt's lie regaining its grip, and she zigzagged, dodging pipes and fists, her breath ragged. Carver recovered, limping after her, the rope trailing like a snake, and she saw the gallows ahead, a crude scaffold rioters had rigged, its wood blackened by fire. He caught her, his arm locking around her neck, and dragged her toward it, the mob parting with cheers, their hate a tidal wave. She clawed at him, nails raking his face, drawing blood, but his grip tightened, choking her as he hauled her up the steps, the noose dangling in the flickering light. "Pratt's orders," he grunted, looping it over her head, the rough hemp biting her skin. She kicked, heels slamming his shins, and twisted, buying seconds, her mind racing for a way out. The crowd surged below, torches waving, their faces a blur of rage and fear, Pratt's lie a poison they'd swallowed whole. She'd turned them briefly, her broadcast a crack in his armor, but the sniper's shot had sealed her fate, a signal to finish her fast. Her scalp bled, a sticky trail down her back, and she gasped, the noose tightening as Carver yanked the rope, her feet scraping the platform. The prison burned around them, walls crumbling, and she spotted the sniper reloading, his scope glinting cold. She'd fought from nothing, turned mobs before, but this was Pratt's endgame, a public death, to silence her forever. Her vision darkened, breath shallow, but she glared at Carver, spitting blood in his face, defiance her last stand. He laughed, wiping it off, and pulled the lever, the floor dropping beneath her, a sick lurch that stopped short as the rope snagged, leaving her dangling, alive but choking. She swung, legs kicking air, the mob's cheers a deafening roar, and clawed at the hemp, fingers slipping on her own blood. Carver stepped back, shotgun raised, ready to finish it if the rope failed. But the scaffold shook, a blast rocking the yard, rioters scattering as guards fired into the crowd. She twisted, the snag holding, and saw a figure in the smoke. Not a rioter, not Carver, but someone new cutting through the chaos. Friend or foe, she couldn't tell, but it was a flicker of chance, a thread in the fire. Pratt's sniper aimed again, the mob pressed closer, and she fought, lungs burning, the noose a vice on her throat. She'd turned them once, nearly won, but Pratt's trap was iron, Carver's hand its blade, and she dangled on the edge, a breath from death, her will a fading spark in the inferno. Blood streaked the Birmingham courthouse steps, a crimson trail dripping from Latoya Jenkins' scalp where the sniper's bullet had grazed her, staining her torn orange jumpsuit as she stumbled forward, wrists cuffed tight behind her back. Her neck burned raw from the noose Carver had looped around it, the hemp's bite a lingering choke, even after guards had cut her down from the gallows when the riot collapsed. The yard's chaos replayed in her mind, flames licking the prison walls, the mob's roars fading as her radio broadcast had turned some against Pratt, only for his sniper to strike and Carver to drag her to death's edge. She'd clawed free, that mystery figure in the smoke vanishing as feds stormed in, their black vans screeching to a halt, pulling her from the scaffold's grip. Now hauled before a federal judge, she clung to the stolen radio, its cracked shell tucked into her waistband. Pratt's oily plea recorded within, her last shard of proof since the folder and USB were lost to Solitary's walls. She straightened, blood matting her braids, defiance afire in her chest. They'd kill her yet, but not without a fight. The courthouse loomed, its marble facade cracked from the riot's edge, the air thick with smoke and the tang of gunpowder drifting from the prison a mile off. Officer Dwayne Carver marched her, up the steps, his shotgun slung over his shoulder, his knee still limping from her bat swing, a scowl twisting his blood-smeared face where she'd raked him. Feds flanked them, suits crisp despite the chaos, their eyes cold as they shoved her through the doors into a courtroom buzzing with tension. The judge, a stern woman with grey hair pulled tight, sat high behind the bench, her gavel resting like a loaded gun. Latoya's legs shook, exhaustion gnawing her bones, but she locked eyes with the judge, chin up, the radio digging into her hip. Vernon Pratt sat in the gallery, silver hair gleaming, his suit pristine, a king watching his prey bleed. She'd turn this room on him, she swore it, even if it was her last stand. The feds uncuffed her, shoving her into the defendant's chair, her grazed arm throbbing as she gripped the table, blood smudging the wood. The prosecutor, a lean man with a buzz cut, stood, his voice sharp as he laid out the charges. Latoya Jenkins, radical cop killer, incited a prison riot, murdered a guard, endangered this city, he said, pacing before the judge. We demand immediate sentencing, death by lethal injection. Latoya's stomach clenched, Pratt's lie a noose tightening anew, but she rose, legs trembling, and slammed the radio on the table, its wires dangling like guts. I've got proof, she rasped, voice raw from the smoke. Pratt framed me, staged it all, listen. She hit play, static crackling before his voice oozed out, the fake sobs from the riot broadcast. She killed my husband, the widow's. Cry a rehearsed stab. The room stilled, the judge's eyes narrowing, and Latoya pressed on. He's lying, turned the mob on me, killed my friend Jamal to silence us. The prosecutor lunged, objection irrelevant. But the judge raised a hand silencing him, her gaze flicking to Pratt, who shifted in his seat, a bead of sweat glistening on his brow. Latoya's heart thudded, hope flaring bright as she rewound the tape, playing it again, Pratt's plea looping, a crack in his mask. He burned my sister's house, framed me for it, shot at me, she said, pointing at him, blood dripping onto the floor. This is his voice, his plan. The judge leaned forward, peering at the radio, then at Pratt, her lips a thin line. "Play it for the record," she ordered, and a clerk scrambled to hook it up, the courtroom speakers blaring Pratt's words, a venomous echo that turned heads in the gallery. Latoya smirked, tasting a win, her knees steadying. She'd flipped it, hadn't she? Exposed him to the law's face. The judge scribbled notes, the prosecutor's jaw tightening, and a murmur rippled through the room, reporters in the back scribbling. "Fast." "This warrants review," the judge said, voice clipped. "Federal agents implicated in corruption will be suspended pending investigation." Latoya's breath caught, a rush of triumph surging through her veins. Carver stiffened beside, his shotgun slipping an inch, and Pratt's face paled, his hands clenching the bench. She'd done it, turned the feds on their own, her radio a dagger in Pratt's gut. The judge banged the gavel. Trial postponed, evidence to be examined. And Latoya sank into the chair, blood pooling under her, relief loosening her shoulders. She'd emerged from the riot, faced the noose and now stood alive, Pratt's allies unraveling. The courtroom buzzed, a tide shifting, and she closed her eyes, savoring the moment, a breath of freedom in the chaos. Then Carver stood, his limp forgotten, and tossed a folded paper onto the bench, his grin a slash of menace that chilled her blood. "Your Honor," he said, voice smooth despite the scratches on his face. "New evidence, straight from the White House." The judge unfolded it, her brow furrowing as she read, and Latoya's gut twisted, dread coiling tight. "What's this?" she snapped, lunging for it, but a Fed grabbed her arm, pinning her back, her grazed shoulder screaming. Under his grip. The judge cleared her throat, reading aloud, "Executive Directive. Latoya Jenkins deemed a national security threat. Radical actions destabilizing public order. Immediate silencing authorized." The room gasped, Latoya's breath stopping. As Pratt leaned back, his smirk returning, a predator scenting blood. The paper was a fake, had to be, but its seal gleamed, a White House stamp that turned her stomach. "Death row now," the judge said, her voice flat, banging the gavel hard, enough to crack the silence. Latoya's knees buckled, the Fed dragging her up, her radio clattering to the floor, its wires snapping loose. "No!" she yelled, twisting free, lunging for Pratt, but Carver caught her, his arm locking around her throat, choking her as he hauled her back. "You lose," he hissed, breath hot against her ear, and she kicked, heels slamming his shins. But the Feds swarmed, pinning her arms, her blood smearing their suits. The judge rose, exiting fast, and Pratt laughed from the gallery, a low, triumphant sound that echoed in her skull. She'd turned the room, exposed his voice, but he'd flipped it with a forged memo, twisting the White House call from the hospital steps into a kill order, a lie so bold it'd bury her alive. They dragged her down the hall, her sneakers squeaking on marble, the courthouse a blur of white and shadow as reporters shouted questions she couldn't answer. Her scalp bled anew, a sticky trail marking her path, and she clawed at Carver, nails digging into his wrist, drawing blood he ignored. The Feds shoved her into a van, its engine roaring as it peeled out, the prison looming ahead, its burned walls a grim welcome. She slumped against the seat, breath ragged, the radio gone, her proof shattered on the courtroom floor. Pratt's trap was iron, a federal noose she couldn't dodge, and Carver's grip lingered on her throat, a ghost of the gallows. She'd tasted victory, felt the system bend, but he'd bent it back, a titan who'd rather kill her than lose. Her eyes narrowed, tracing cracks in the van's ceiling, plotting even as death row loomed. They'd silenced her voice, but not her will, a spark still burning in the dark. The van screeched to a stop, gates clanging open, and Carver yanked her out, his shotgun prodding her spine as they marched her through the prison's charred remains. The cell block was a husk, smoke still curling from the riot scars, and they shoved her into a new cell, its steel door slamming shut, the clang a death knell in her ears. She sank to the floor, blood pooling under her, the jumpsuit sticking to her skin. Pratt's memo replayed, a fake that had turned her win into a sentence, and she pounded the concrete, a dull thud against the silence. Carver's grin, Pratt's laugh, the judge's gavel, all weapons in a war she'd nearly won. She'd fought from nothing, turned mobs and courts, but this was the endgame, a trap she couldn't outrun. Not yet. Her breath steadied, resolve hardening like stone, a promise to fight even from the grave. The Birmingham execution chamber was a sterile crypt, its white tiles gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights, the air cold and thick with the antiseptic tang of bleach. Latoya Jenkins stood strapped to the gurney, her orange jumpsuit swapped for a thin gown, wrists and ankles bound tight with leather straps that bit into her bruised skin. Blood crusted her scalp where the sniper's bullet had grazed her, a dull throb echoing the noose's burn on her neck, her grazed arm aching beneath the bandage. The needle hovered above her vein, a steel glint promising silence. Vernon Pratt's fake White House memo, her death warrant after the courtroom's brutal flip. She'd fought from the hospital steps to this moment, turned mobs and courts, lost Jamal, Keisha's trust, and every shred of proof, only to land here, facing lethal injection for crimes she didn't commit. Her braids hung limp, sweat beading on her brow, but she glared at the one-way glass knowing Pratt watched, his silver hair a ghost in her mind. She'd go down defiant, a spark uncrushed, even as the clock ticked to dawn. The warden stood at the gurney's head, a stout man with a grey mustache, his voice flat as he read the sentence. Latoya Jenkins, convicted of murder, riot incitement and national security threats, sentenced to death by order of federal court, March 18th, 1995. Her chest tightened, the date a hammer blow, exactly 6 months since she'd stood victorious outside Birmingham General, whistleblower report in hand. Officer Dwayne Carver lingered by the door, shotgun slung low, his limp from her bat swing a faint hitch, his grin a slash of triumph beneath the scratches she'd carved on his face. She'd turned the rioters with her radio, delayed the trial. With her note, but Pratt's forged memo had slammed the door shut, framing her as a radical to be silenced. The warden nodded to the executioner, a masked figure in blue who adjusted the IV line, the needle's tip cold against her skin. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, and spat at Carver, a weak arc that fell short but burned with her rage. The clock hit 6, dawn breaking outside, its light blocked by the chamber's steel walls. Latoya's breath came fast, shallow, her mind racing through the war she'd waged. The hospital's neglect, Keisha's burned home, Jamal's blood, Marla's betrayal, the mob's hate. She'd lost it all, but she'd exposed Pratt, hadn't she? Even if he won, her fight would echo, a scar on his empire. The executioner raised the syringe, a clear liquid glinting, and she braced herself, eyes locked on the glass, imagining Pratt's smug face. Then a phone rang, shrill and sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. The warden froze, hand hovering over the clipboard, and Carver's grin faltered, his pale eyes darting to the wall-mounted receiver. The executioner paused, needle, poised, and Latoya's pulse spiked, a wild hope clawing through the dread. Who'd call now at the last second? The warden snatched the phone, his mustache twitching as he listened, his face draining of color with every word. "Yes, sir," he muttered, voice trembling. "Right away, sir." He slammed the receiver down, turning to Carver, eyes wide with shock. "Stop it," he barked, waving the executioner back. "It's the White House, the real one. Pratt's memo's a fake, whistleblower confirmed it. Feds are raiding Birmingham General now." Latoya's breath caught, a gasp tearing from her. Throat as the straps loosened, the needle pulling free. Carver staggered, shotgun slipping, his limp suddenly pronounced, and she sat up, blood rushing to her head, disbelief warring with triumph. The White House call from the hospital steps, a misdialed fluke she'd clung to, had circled back, a truth Pratt couldn't forge. She'd won, hadn't she? Survived the noose, the needle, his lies. The door burst open, federal agents in black, vests storming in, their boots thudding on the tiles, rifles trained on Carver, who dropped his weapon, hands shaking. "Vernon Pratt," an agent shouted, dragging the CEO from the witness room, his silver hair disheveled, his suit rumpled as cuffs snapped on his wrists. He'd been there, watching, his smirk gone, replaced by a snarl as he lunged toward Latoya, stopped short by the agent's grip. "You're nothing," he spat, voice cracking, but she laughed, a raw, jagged sound that bounced off the walls. "You're done," she said, sliding off the gurney, legs wobbly but holding, blood dripping onto the floor. The agents hauled, Pratt out, his shouts fading down the hall, and the warden uncuffed her. Muttering apologies she ignored. She stood tall, gown flapping, the chambers cold no match for the fire in her veins. The feds escorted her out, past the prison's charred gates into a dawn streaked with purple and orange, the air sharp with spring chill. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, their questions a blur she didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the horizon where Birmingham General loomed, its empire cracking under federal boots. She'd lost everything, her job, her sister's home, Jamal's life, but she'd torn Pratt down, exposed his rot to the world. The agents promised protection, a new start, but she waved them off, needing airspace, a moment to breathe free. Her scalp throbbed, her neck raw, but she walked, each step a reclaiming, the city waking to a truth she'd bled for. Pratt was gone, his lies ashes, and she'd survived, a victor in a war she'd never wanted. Then Carver stepped forward, unescorted, his shotgun gone, hands loose at his sides, his face a mask of ruin. Latoya froze, instinct screaming danger, but the feds were yards off, distracted by Pratt's exit. "I planted it," he said, voice low, eyes hollow. "The memo, all of it. Wanted to fix something." Before she could react, he pulled a pistol from his boot, not aiming at her but at himself, pressing it to his temple. "I'm sorry," he muttered, and pulled the trigger, a crack that split the morning, blood spraying the pavement as he crumpled, lifeless at her feet. Latoya stumbled, back breath-hitching horror crashing over her triumph, the crowd gasping as cameras whirred. Carver's body lay still, a red pool spreading. His redemption a bullet she hadn't asked for. She sank to her knees, the pavement cold against her palms, blood and ash clinging to her gown. The feds rushed back, shouting, but she stared at Carver, his confession a weight she couldn't carry. He'd been Pratt's blade, cut her life to ribbons, yet he'd broken too, a cog snapping under the machine's grind. The White House call had saved her, a whistleblower's leak unmasking the memo, but this Carver's end twisted it, a final scar on her soul. She rose unsteady, the city blurring through tears she hadn't shed in months, and walked past. The cameras past the feds into the dawn's light. Pratt was cuffed, his empire dust, but the cost sprawled behind her. Keisha in jail, Jamal dead, Carver's blood on the ground, a victory bitter with loss. The street stretched ahead, quiet, beyond the chaos, and Latoya kept moving, her gown flapping in the breeze, blood drying in stiff trails. She'd fought from nothing, turned a hospital's lies into a federal reckoning, but the roots of racism ran deeper, a hydra she'd only wounded. Keisha's face flashed, a hope she'd rebuild, a sister she'd free, and she clenched her fists, nails biting her palms, the pain a tether to her will. The feds would dig, Pratt would fall, but Carver's shot rang in her ears, a reminder that justice wasn't clean, wasn't whole. She stopped at a corner, the sun climbing, casting her shadow long and jagged, and breathed deep, the air sharp and free. She'd won, survived, but the fight wasn't over, not while the system stood, scarred but alive, waiting for her next move. Latoya Jenkins' journey reveals profound truths about resilience, systemic racism, and the cost of justice. Her fight against Vernon Pratt and a corrupt system teaches us that truth can be a double-edged sword, powerful yet perilous. She exposed neglect at Birmingham General, only to face relentless retaliation, arrests, betrayal, and a death sentence, showing how deeply racism embeds itself in institutions, twisting justice into a weapon against the brave. Her story underscores that standing up isn't just about winning. It's about enduring, even when allies like Marla turn traitor or loved ones like Keisha suffer collateral damage. Latoya's ingenuity, from smuggled notes to stolen radios, proves resourcefulness can spark hope in the darkest corners. Yet Carver's suicide reminds us that redemption can come too late, leaving scars on both victim and villain. The White House Call, a fluke turned salvation, highlights how unpredictable allies can shift the tide, but also how fragile victories are against a system that bends before it breaks. Latoya's survival wasn't clean. Jamal's death, Keisha's imprisonment, and her own wounds mark the price of defiance. It's a lesson in sacrifice. Justice demands more than courage. It takes everything. and still the fight persists. Her tale urges us to question who pays when truth challenges power, and to recognize that racism's roots run deeper than one villain's fall. So, what's your takeaway? Comment below if you think Latoya's battle proves one voice can change the game. Hit like and subscribe if her grit inspires you to stand up, and share if you believe these stories need telling. Thanks for joining this journey. May you find strength to confront your own battles and hope to see justice bloom, even through the ashes.